Hello, and thank you for joining a Marketing Sherpa webinar. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast of the United States, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Today, we are going to take on a challenging and exciting subject because we are going to talk about the future. Now, the future can be difficult, can be scary, and what we're going to talk about could seem maybe almost impossible where you are today. But keep in mind, look at these prognostications you see on the screen. We've also been told that a rocket will never be able to leave the Earth's atmosphere. We're told a computer in the future may weigh no more than 1.5 tons. I love this one from the railroad. Rail travel at high speed is not possible because passengers would not be able to breathe. So we know what we're getting into is some scary territory. But let's get our future hats on and see what's possible. We're going to talk about our industry in particular and the future of advertising, the future of marketing, and here's some quotes from this great book, Beyond Advertising, Creating Value Through All Customer Touchpoints. We're going to talk to the author in just a moment. One of my favorites here from Bob McDonald, the CEO of Procter & Gamble. He says, "We know from our history that while promotions may win quarters, innovation wins decades." So whatever you're working on right now, maybe an email promotion, social media promotion, could be direct mail. I know you're very focused on today, you're very focused on this week, you're very focused on this quarter, hitting your numbers, getting your leads, selling your products. But sometimes we have to gaze up from that and see how we can create the future. And joining me now is perhaps the preeminent researcher in the entire world on looking into what's going on in the future of advertising and marketing. Thanks for joining us. Catharine Hays, Executive Director of the Future of Advertising program at the Wharton School. How are you doing today, Catharine?
Wonderful, thank you, Daniel. And that's not too much of a setup. We can come through today, absolutely. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you're all tuning in and listening in for the webinar today. Happy to have you.
So Catharine, tell us a bit about your background. How does one become the Executive Director of the Future of Advertising program at Wharton?
Well, it helps to go to Wharton in the first place. That's my alma mater back in the day. And one of my professors at the time was Professor Jerry Wind. In fact, he taught marketing strategy. And I was a complete convert and went on to join AT&T in their corporate strategy, then in corporate sales, and then back into corporate marketing, kind of a revolving door, and then strategy for about 16 years, and loved it, had a great time. And ran into Jerry at Wharton at a conference, and he said, "Hey, I've got this thing at my think tank called the SEI Center for Advanced Studies in Management, and we've identified this topic of all this crazy stuff that's going on with advertising and marketing right now." This was in late 2007. Want to come help us look into it? So with that, Jerry and I launched the Future of Advertising program in early 2008, and it's been a great ride.
Great. So in this episode, we're going to take a closer look at some of that research. But first, let me say that we are already in the future in some ways, right? If you think back 20 years and said, hey, how can I have an interactive conversation with people all over the world that would seem impossible? We can do that today. So I urge you, don't just sit and watch passively. Ask questions. Share your own experience. You can use hashtag Sherpa17 to do that. Catharine and I have been working for months on these slides. But we're going to take this webinar wherever you want us to take it. So ask your questions on hashtag Sherpa17 and share your own advice and feedback on what you see is coming up. You also see some related content from Marketing Sherpa there. But let's get into it a little deeper. So what exactly is the Wharton Future of Advertising program?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's part of the SEI Center, which is Wharton's think tank, which looks at the future to ensure that the school is focusing on projects and products and topics that the real world is really interested in. And what we did is we started out by really honing in on we actually have now 90 global advisory board members. It's linking between academia and practitioners, thought leaders around the world. We actually have representation from 22 countries, every region. It's certainly very interdisciplinary. We go way beyond the normal boundaries of advertising and marketing to ensure that we're looking at this in a much more holistic way, particularly given what's going on with the future. And as our mission, as it says here, we're really focused on trying to actually get deeper insights, not sort of the superficial, the kind of onslaught of information that you're getting on a daily basis, but really getting down into the research to dig more deeply. Second, to get people to really use more bolder innovation and to partner and collaborate with those who are interested in trying to co-create the future. And then finally, we really see the impact of advertising as necessarily far more broad than just ROI, than just the bottom line for the corporations. And we'll talk a little bit about it. But it should also be a win-win for people as well as for culture and society. advertising and marketing has an outsized role in culture, as we know, and we think it should be a net positive, not a net negative.
And that was one of the really interesting things that came through in your research that we discussed. But let's start now. We see the research question on the screen. How did you guys come up with this research question? Why did you focus on advertising in 2020?
Right. Well, as we brought together our global advisory board on an annual basis and held summits around the world, sort of 30 people who are sort of the thought leaders in each region, it became clear that marketers and advertisers were really feeling like they were back on their heels, that they were such in a reactionary mode. It's like, oh my gosh, this is happening and this is happening, and not feeling like they were getting ahead of the curve. So we pulled something out of Professor Wynn's playbook, his research playbook. And rather than trying to predict what the future would look like, as your slides were earlier, and some of the downside of that, that was a great setup. Instead, what we tried to do is say, what's the best that advertising could and should be? This notion of idealized design. And these two questions were really for several reasons. One, to kind of hone in on what that actually looks and feels like in 2020. So the questions are very specific and tailored so that we were kind of getting to what this looks and feels like. But perhaps equally important is, what do we do now to get ready for that future? And if you think about it, if you actually start to do those things that you think you should be doing to get ready for a more desired future, you're actually co-creating that. And that's a lot of what the executives came back and told us is, you know what, as we started to think about this and take a step back from our day-to-day that we have to deal with every day and looked to what we thought we could be doing about the future, that they said that it really helped them to kind of rethink the way that they were approaching it. And this was back in 2012. So there was, at that point, an 8-year time frame in terms of looking ahead.
Yeah, I love that co-creating element. And I thought of it in the sense of, not just being the newsman, as we said, and saying what already happened, what really works, right? Not just even being the meteorologist and saying what's going to happen. You're almost like, it's like you're trying to change the weather and saying what should happen. And so tell us about your approach, because you really, as you mentioned, it's very real world. Like a lot of times academia might, some people have the downside of like, oh, it's out of touch with what marketers or businesses are really working on. How did you get so real world with your research?
Well, first of all, we went out to, as I said, both academics as well as practitioners. So practitioners are very, very much grounded in the real world. And the academicians with whom we collaborated and asked to weigh in are also grounded in the real world and are anxious to have the research that they do be something that people can actually put into practice. The other thing that I think is important to note is that we really wanted to try to create a mosaic. So we didn't ask people to say, okay, tell us the whole picture. Instead, we sort of said, okay, your area of expertise, you're a behavioral psychologist, you're a cultural anthropologist, you're looking at data and analytics, you're one of the new tech companies, you're a social media platform, Google, Facebook, et cetera. From your vantage point, the best that you know about what you see on the horizon, how would you sort of project that? And then that's what we did, was sort of to take that mosaic of all these different viewpoints based on what people were actually seeing. So to your point, Daniel, making it practicable, making it something that people actually could, was based in reality with an eye toward the future.
Okay. And if you're watching, as you may know, Marketing Sherpa conducts research as well. So some of Catharine's research is great because it really provides that industry look about how we should change things. With Marketing Sherpa, we ran a study of 2,400 consumers to get at what is the difference between satisfied and unsatisfied customers and how they think of companies and how they think of marketing and brands. And one of the biggest differences we saw was this idea of customer-first marketing, which is why we were so excited when we first read about Catharine's research, because some of the things we talked about were very much in line. So what we're going to do first is take a look at some of the discoveries that we found in surveying consumers, and then talk to Catharine about what her innovation network, what her collaborators, what type of advice they would give you based on seeing some of this research. So the first piece of research you're seeing on screen is the difference between how satisfied and unsatisfied customers talk about marketing. And as you'll see, the biggest differentiation, unsatisfied customers, the top way they talked about a company's marketing when they were unsatisfied with that company, the company does not put my needs and wants above its own business goals, which sets up this idea that perhaps customer-centric marketing, the idea of putting the customer at the center, targeting with the right messages, relevant products. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe you have to elevate the customer and make sure that you're putting them first with all of your marketing, all of the asks you're making of them, all of the conversion goals you have of them. Are you putting them first? There seems to be this subtle understanding where customers can sense it and tell it. So let's see how we can put that into action. One of the first quotes we got from your collaborators that I really like, Catherine, was here from Jennifer, and she advised people, hey, don't just think about one-to-one marketing as technology. Think about it about the feeling that you give customers. So what have you seen with technology and with what Jennifer's working on specifically?
Yeah, Jen's really great. Her perspective is fun because we actually presented recently at Deloitte's Next CMO Academy, where companies have identified the people who are next in line to become CMOs. So she's really worked with them over the last few years as they've instituted. And I think that's a big part of where this comes from, is that she's seen in some cases where there's such a fixation on the technology that you're bombarding and you're marketing at. One of the images that I think is a good way to remember what she's talking about here is we always in slides and PowerPoints use a target with an arrow in it to think of target marketing. And if you imagine that in the middle of your forehead, how does that really feel? How does that really feel? So it's really sort of turning that around. And in fact, I think this does it best. Have the customer's best interests at heart, not how much can I sell at them.
Yeah, that's customer first marketing, because at the end of the day, as you say, Catherine, if we had used that word in any other way, targeted, people do not want to be targeted. MT Carney also brought up a great point that, we think of marketing, certainly we think of things like email marketing, we think of print advertising and these types of things, but if that product is good enough, it could be a marketing channel in itself. So how have you seen product development foster into marketing and what MT's talking about?
Yeah, MT has a great perspective. She actually came and spoke on campus for our advertising management and was able to use one of her clients as a case study. And it's certainly something that we talk about. And I have a feeling that our listeners out there probably have felt this in many ways. If instead of thinking that you're taking a product that exists and marketing at a customer or an audience, instead that you're saying, what is this product in the first place? Is this even something that we want? One of the case studies that we've done early on was with Domino's, where the agency talked with the client and the first thing they said is basically, your product sucks. We can't do any marketing around this until you actually do something about what it is that you're selling. And it really led to a complete transformation for the way that they, from the CEO up all the way throughout the organization, thought about all elements of the touch points with the customer, all the way back into the very product and service that's at the core of who they are.
And a great element of, a great example of transparent marketing from Domino's. They were very public about that conversation, weren't they?
Yeah, it became a part of what they did. And in fact, in doing some interviews with both the CMO and the CEO, one of the things, the anecdotes that I loved so much is he said, you know what, we didn't even know it before, but people didn't want to tell people where they worked. Our employees literally didn't want to say where they worked because the product was so low. And afterward, with again the transformation and becoming so public and so open, it totally made it different in terms of the franchisees, their key constituents, as well as the key their employees feeling like, yeah, I work for this company, and look at all the great things that they're doing, and they have really taken that platform and continued on with it.
That's great. So product development can also help with employee morale and recruiting as well.
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah, everyone wants to be proud of where they work. So let's take a look at the next piece of research. And if you want to see these charts in more detail, we're sharing all of them on hashtag Sherpa17. So you can go click and see the full article and get the full details. And also, just a reminder, you can share your questions on hashtag Sherpa17, or you can be bold. Share your own predictions on the future of advertising. What will advertising and marketing look like in the next 3 years, 8 years? We won't hold you to it. Again, that's hashtag Sherpa17 on Twitter. So the next one here we look at, satisfied customers were 3 times more likely to say the company often or always put their needs before its business goals. Again, another great example of not just customer first marketing, but a customer first business, putting that customer first. So let's take a look. Here's some, I really like this advice from Michael J. Collins, because he works at the CFA Institute. And so they're a little different maybe than a lot of people that's tuning in today, because they're a nonprofit. And he, as a nonprofit, has to think of his customers not as customers, but as members. Maybe we could all learn something from that, not just think of them as someone that's writing us a check or paying money to us, but it's part of our community. You talked about co-creating value before. Is that an element that marketers can learn from with this?
Absolutely. And Michael was a guest on our radio show on Sirius XM 111, and he is so passionate about that. It was really interesting to hear him talk about how that relationship, it's as if every single day he realizes that he has to earn the trust of the membership, or else they can drop their membership. And that's where their income dollars come from. So he's constantly engaging the membership, and really seeing them as basically breaking down the silo between who his organization is and who his customers are, and seeing them as one holistic community. And that completely changes the way that he thinks about them, sort of the mental model, the term that we like to use, how they consider it. So we asked him if we could adopt this notion of thinking of customers as members and having to earn their trust that way. And he liked that a lot.
And that's a really good advice, I think, when we look at this next piece of advice from Richard Smith from Verizon. It's no surprise marketers are challenged by technology, the move to digital, the move to mobile, and sometimes we just look at our customers as a device, right? They're on mobile, they're on desktop, they're wherever. But at the end of the day, if we're looking at omni-channel marketing, it's about the actual human beings behind those devices, right? So what have you learned about what marketers can do to deal with this huge change in technology we're seeing?
How much time do we have for the webinar? No, I can. That's a whole nother book, but I guess in short, I'm really just focusing in on what Richard had to say here. And he's really great, because I'm actually so pleased that he's in charge of smart communities for IoT ecosystems at Verizon. He was formerly with a tech company called Kitewheel, whose whole infrastructure platform was around helping marketers to integrate information about their customers across all the different platforms, so that when they were engaging with customers, they weren't having to ask the same information over and over again. We've all had it. You're on the phone, then you get transferred, and they're like, can you give me your information? And it's so frustrating. So they were laser-like in trying to take the technologies that existed and really create this orchestration of all touch points, which is a big part of what we talked about. Not just omni-channel, not just all the ways that people can buy, but all the ways that they come in contact with you, and making that really feel like a seamless experience. I should also say that Richard's from New Jersey. Can you tell at the end of that first paragraph, the other brands are sheep being slaughtered by their customers. So if you want something a little graphic, Richard's great at that.
I love that. Yeah, really, anything that touches the customer is marketing, right? It's not just emails, anything that touches the customer from that brand. So let's look at the last piece of marketing Sherpa data before we dive into some of Catharine and Wharton's research. As I said, when we talk about the future, this can seem challenging, it can seem overwhelming, it can seem impossible. And we've definitely heard that feedback some when it comes to the idea of customer-first marketing. But as you can see from this data, customers don't agree that customer-first marketing is impossible. In fact, 92% of customers told us they have experienced customer-first marketing from at least a few companies, and 77% of American consumers think that many companies do not practice customer-first marketing, which means that there is a huge opportunity out there for the companies that do. If only about a quarter of companies are doing it, your competitors might not be. However, obviously, there's a reason companies aren't doing this. It is difficult, and I think Joe McCambly here really hit on one of the reasons why, is that everyone follows essentially the money, everyone follows the incentives within a company. So what have you seen in terms of the actual organizational structure of companies and organizations, and what role marketing plays and how much influence they have, Catharine?
Well, we know that chief marketing officers themselves have about a 24-month window, a time and job, and so there's a tremendous amount of turnover. And I think, as Joe talks about here in some of our conversations with him, he basically says what Jerry Wynn says, who teaches marketing, which is the 4 Ps, the basic 4 Ps of marketing. Rarely do chief marketing officers have responsibility for all of those, and therefore being able to orchestrate and think of it as the CMO as chief marketing orchestrator as opposed to officer might be a better way to do it. And there's been some really interesting books written recently by some of our compatriots, Patrick Barwise at the London Business School, talked about the 12 powers of marketing leaders. And so much of it, given the speed of change and the rest of the dynamics and how important orchestrating all these touch points are, it's about the relationships that the CMOs and the marketers have with the rest of the C-suite, how they're leveraging, how they're creating partnerships with IT, with the CIO, with HR, because people are such an important part of the touch point ecosystem that customers come across, and really seeing themselves as breaking out and getting at that C-level across the board. It's really critical, and the ones who are doing it well that's where we're seeing some of the real important successes.
You can't just be comfortable living in and running the marketing department, right?
And it's being redefined as we speak, exactly.
So now we're going to shift into looking at some of Wharton's research and Catharine's research. And here's this overall roadmap that we're only going to be able to scratch the surface of. But before we dive in, I want to mention that Catharine had originally planned to join us at Marketing Sherpa Summit 2017 as a featured speaker there, and unfortunately was not able to make it due to some last-minute things that came up. However, we did have Marketing Sherpa Summit 2017 in Las Vegas. It was a great event, and if you missed it or if you were there,
feel bad. I see these happy people having a blast. So go ahead and rub it in, Daniel. No worries. That's fine.
My favorite email from you is that I can't even look at hashtag Sherpa17. It's too painful. Catharine emailed me back from Philadelphia when she couldn't make it. But if you were there or if you missed it too, like Catharine, feel free to go to marketingsherpa.com/summit replays. We have all the sessions there available for free download, so you can watch and learn from the case studies, from the featured speakers, and get some value out of that as well. And one of the things Catharine was asking me about the event and how it went and some of the feedback we got from attendees. And attendees, it was an overwhelming success from what we can see. Of course, I'm a little biased in that. But one of the things that they told us is they really want to see more about what's going on in the future. What are some cutting edge things? And Catharine, that's what you really got into here with your roadmap. And so let's first take a look at these 5 forces of change. We're going to go one by one through these in the webinar and give you some examples on how to overcome the 5 forces of change. But at a high level, what are these forces of change and how did you identify them?
Yeah, I think this really is a distillation of the Advertising 2020 project, where we asked sort of what the future should be. And these were the topics that bubbled up that we were sort of able to try to wrestle into these 5 categories that seemed to be a way of looking at the future and organizing it in such a way that you're understanding what the challenges are, because each of these 5 forces of change are really, massively, deeply changing the way that we're operating and can be operating. But secondarily, they're equally the exact opportunity. They provide the ability to enable us to make the kinds of changes that we want to. So it's truly the classic double-edged sword. So this notion of advances in science and technology, I think we're all aware of, but from a science perspective, and we're doing a lot of a collaboration around what's the advances in neuroscience, understanding really what drives people. Hint, a spoiler alert, it's emotion. No surprise there, but now we have the science to back it up. How the whole media landscape is completely being not only just blown up, but being redefined. What is media anymore? How does traditional media evolve? How does it work with new forms of media? And how do we really see this as not just dumb channels, but as this opportunity to provide fantastic contextualization? Third are skeptical and empowered consumers. There's lots and lots of research. I think the research that you have, Daniel, really points to it. But what we found is that it's important, and I would like to put a cross through on number 3, consumers. And instead of saying consumers, talk about people, because thinking of them as something other than this narrow element of somebody who just consumes your product or service, but actually somebody with a life and aspirations and other things that they have going on, really puts a different relationship between the brand and the intended audience. Fourth is we cannot deny that we can't have brands acting like they're in a vacuum, that there's nothing going on except the selling of their product to an individual. And what's going on in culture and society, the geopolitical, around the world, in local communities, really becomes, again, incredibly important for brands to determine how to best acknowledge what's going on, but also to become part of the solution. And that expectation in skeptical, empowered consumers is growing and growing. And then finally, there are a plethora of new business and revenue models that are actually, and on the one hand, disrupting a lot of what we're thinking about. Think about the sharing economy, think about open innovation, but on the other hand, actually providing the opportunity to really rethink how organizations are taking hold of these changes that are going on and recreating their organizational structure, their processes to take advantage of them. Think exponential organizations. If any of you have read that book, I highly recommend it. So that's kind of an overview. And then if that wasn't enough, in the center here it says it's going faster, it's broader, and the interrelated complexity of this change is going on unabated.
Yeah, and so how do you address that, right? And I like that you have that in your roadmap too. How can a marketer address this? You talked about the chief marketing orchestrators before, and I think this all touchpoint value creation model really taps into that. So let's first start at the beginning here about the overall, what's this win-win-win approach that we were talking about?
Yeah, again, when we asked our contributors, this is not, kind of pie in the sky, some academic saying, or, bleeding heart liberals or something saying, we really should think of everybody and make it win-win-win. This was surprisingly and shockingly across the board, not every single person, but of the vast majority of those who responded said, if we're looking to what the future should be, we've got to have a whole different way that we think about this. We've got to have a whole different model. We've got to get out of the short-term sales, win the clicks, the really narrow metrics, and we've got to get into really thinking about this in a far more win-win-win way. Win for the individual and people. We put people, again, not just as customers, but also the employees within a company, all the people who are within this brand steward network, including the agencies. So rather than having this adversarial relationship and it's us against the consumer, us against the agency, or us in the absence of anything else going on in the world, it's sort of like, how do we bring these together? There's a wonderful book by Inder Sidhu at Cisco, who wrote a book called Doing Both, and found that based on his experience there, by setting not an either or objective, but an objective of achieving two or more goals, the outcome was that much better.
And that win for society, I think, is a big thing that many marketers and companies overlook when, again, they're focused on the day-to-day. They have to focus on the balance sheet. They have to focus on, reporting to investors, your quarterly sales calls and stuff. So just briefly mention, get a little deeper into that, about what role you think advertising and marketing can play in society in general, because you brought up some very interesting points when we were talking earlier about perceived value versus actual value and how advertising and marketing really shape how people experience the world.
Well, and there already is an impact on culture and society and the world by the $500 trillion spend, if you put sort of all the new aspect of it. That's going on. So whether we like it or not, that is happening. The question is whether advertisers and marketers are taking responsibility for those externalities, for the impact that they're having, or if they're only looking at it narrowly. And what we're saying, and I think, again, sort of this notion of what's the best it should be, there's an entire spectrum. We're not necessarily saying by any stretch that everybody should be out there saving the whales, but what we are saying is there's a net positive, kind of in the medical field where it's do no harm. Just don't make annoying advertising. Don't do pop-ups when we don't want them. Don't have the video start to play. We all know what annoys us, what, all the bad words, intrusive, irresponsible, irrelevant, just a bare minimum of making that kind of a net is going to be a net positive for society. But then we think, and there's a lot of great research and examples that show that if companies actually take it to the next level, if they actually talk about how they could make a huge difference by getting involved with their communities, by seeing what's the role that their brand has in society, what's the role that their companies have to really make a difference in people's lives, that's a win for society. And then, of course, there are companies who are really baking it in even more to the way that they're working.
Yeah, as you mentioned, what the world should be, this is a big ask, right? So we look at these big forces of change, we look at how we want to shape the world as advertisers, as marketers, in ways that benefit our people, our customers, our employees, our companies. But if you might be sitting on the other end of the line listening to this and thinking, how on earth do I do that? That's such a big ask. So what I love what Catherine and her team created is essentially a checklist-based approach almost, where you can look at your different marketing and advertising that you're pulling off and seeing, hey, am I really following these to meet these bigger objectives? And we're going to go through these one by one, and you're going to see some examples of these. But first, at a high level, Catherine, what are the raves and mains?
Yes, really what we've focused in on are the two elements that people talk about, is content king or is context king? And what we're saying is they reign together. They're both royalty. We've actually used the phrase substance because we think vocabulary matters. On the content side for substance, I love this acronym RAVES because it really gets to the point of kind of raving about how well this is. Relevant and respectful for the audience, actionable, something that people can actually do something with, that it's not static, it's dynamic, valuable and value generating, that the actual interaction that you're having, the content is something that people welcome and want in their lives, that it's an exceptional experience. And I like to say that, the bar that should be set here is the last best experience that you had. We all know what it's like, or probably most of us know what it's like to have Amazon Prime and how easy it is to interact, how much information is provided to you that's really relevant. That exceptional experience is what people are expecting across the board. And then finally, that it's a share-worthy story. This is really where the amplification comes in, that if what they're experiencing, what they're seeing is something that they actually think is worth sharing with others, then you've just multiplied the effect of your content. On the context side, it becomes, there's such richness that technology provides to us. Think about it as multisensory, all the different ways that the senses can brought to the fore and really impacting how a person perceives it, and really adding in that sixth sense of feeling, of intuition, of emotion. Audience is for the audience frame of mind. Where are they at that particular moment? We can know now through facial recognition, through voice recognition, the kind of mood or mode that somebody's in. And there's been some great academic research that shows that people's likelihood to listen to messages, to relate to brands can vary greatly according to exactly what their frame of mind is. D is for delivery mechanism, and this is not only the device that you're talking about, whether it's television or mobile device or a laptop, or each of which has a different set of attributes and ways that people use them, but the platform that's there as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that, be it Pinterest or Snapchat or whatever other the opportunities are to really tailor to that particular delivery mechanism. For environment, it's both the environment that somebody's in with geolocational and weather data. You can actually know whether somebody's sitting in the rain. Certainly with outdoor media, whether there's an event going on, whether they're with other people. What's that environment that they're in at that particular moment that you can take advantage of to tailor your message to them? And then finally is synergy, and we make it sort of a superscript there because it's sort of an exponential, the extent to which you are thinking about each of these interactions, each of these touch points as synergistic with others, then it has an exponential effect on the experience that the audience is having and how they think about the brand.
All right, for our audience, that might seem like a lot to take in, and it should be, right? We're talking about a very big topic here. But let's take a look, we'll go through these 5 forces of change one by one and show how you can apply this substance and context to it. So as a first example, Catherine, you gave us an Airbnb app install. How does this use the raves and mains approach?
Yeah, so this really gets into sort of one of the first forces of change, which is advancement in technology. And we know that we want to make sure that we get Airbnb is a great example because they realized that the more they can get their users to go in-app, their ability, their driving actually people to make reservations increases hugely. And so by actually having the technology and leveraging the technology, which in this case is from a company called Branch, where they're actually be able to have the links that drive users directly to a piece of content within the app and as a result increased their install rate by 19%. So first of all, it's very actionable. It's something that it's not static. You're not just seeing an advertisement. You're seeing something where you click on it and it takes you directly to where you want to go. And secondly, it really understands the dynamics of a mobile device. You don't want to have to be clicking around. You don't want to have to be figuring it out. You don't want to have to go to a different screen or go to your app. This is a seamless experience based on the particular delivery mechanism that you're using, in this case, a mobile device.
And another element in a way Airbnb was able to use email to tie into that mobile device was with deep links that sent people from an email directly to somewhere within the app where they can make that booking. So this is an example of synergy, Catherine?
Yeah, it really is, because if you think about it, this is how somebody can use sort of different technologies, but really have them work together. So it's clearly taking the email that they're working on, but actually linking it deep to where the person is actually looking. So in this case, it's a particular location. It gives you full information. So the synergies between that and using the WhatsApp, in this case, the synergies between the different tools make it that much more compelling for the user, and the results really drove that as well.
Okay, next let's look at that redefined media landscape. So Catherine, as we were talking before we actually got into the webinar, the world has changed a lot since my career started, I'm sure, since your career started as well. I remember when I started out, getting print ads into the Wall Street Journal, getting to work on those print ads in the Wall Street Journal, that was like the top for me. I was so excited to be getting to work on that. So how has the media landscape changed, and what's a great example of how we can deal with that?
Well, I think we all have felt the change of landscape, and for the advertisers and marketers on the phone, you experience this every single day, looking at the plethora of opportunities and the fragmentation of the media landscape. I love this example because it forces us to think more creatively about what media actually is. And in this case, the Sydney Opera House, which is this iconic institution, people from all over the world come to visit it, and it's prominent. I think it's the biggest site in Australia for Instagrammers who post this on their site. But what they found is that people weren't actually going inside to the Opera House. So they actually partnered with Samsung. And when people were posting Instagrams, they could respond to them real time with people who were inside the Opera House saying, "Come on inside, come on in," was the campaign, that they then were provided with an internal, and they actually got to go inside. They got to try on costumes. They were given tours by some of the artists who were there. So in real time, they used this new media of Instagram in this particular case with old media, which is the product, the building itself, and they combined them together. And then that became an incredibly share-worthy story. The results in terms of how many people then went on to actually go inside, experience it more, bookings is really impressive. So really actually making it actionable, and then this multi-sensory experience, sort of a first-hand physical experience to connect with the digital experience.
Yeah, I love that because it's a great example of customer-first marketing as well, like actually creating value through the marketing, because it'd be very easy for the Sydney Opera House or any other organization to say, hey, we have a corporate policy, no one is allowed here, we're not having an event due to insurance or whatever it is. But they broke down those barriers and they said, how can we give value to the customer through our marketing? So that's really nice. Another example we have coming up here, Cinco de Mayo is this Friday, and this really ties into contextually for us. So what did Taco Bell do?
Yeah, so they really drive the point home that each of the social media channels that are there really have their own personality. So gone are the days when marketers took a piece of content that was maybe a snippet of a television ad or a snippet of a print ad, and then sort of cut and pasted into Facebook and LinkedIn and wherever else they were. Instead, really saying, what's the personality of this particular, and what is the personality of Snapchat? And as we know, these filters have become so popular, and I think Taco Bell, as they have with a lot of their other advertising and marketing campaigns, really nailed it with this. I mean, who wouldn't want to have your face with a taco shell like this? Certainly very shareable, certainly posted all over the place. And really, this gets back to what I was talking before about really taking advantage about what's going on in the environment. Clearly, it's a no-brainer for Taco Bell to be thinking about Cinco de Mayo, but doing it in a really innovative and way that, you know, was in this case for them relatively inexpensive, but then yielded something like 224 million views in a day. So I'll be interested to see what they come up with for this Cinco de Mayo. I think it's a great one to know, to on the contextualized side, make it really relevant for that particular platform.
Yeah, Lark G on hashtag Sherpa17 on Twitter says, is content king or context? I say a combination of both, and I think this is a great example of that combination. But let's get into the skeptical and empowered consumers. And I like what you said before about how they're not just consumers, they're people. They're not tacos either, right? they're actually people, and they have lives outside of just our product. And sometimes we think of them only as customers of our product. So how did Target overcome this?
Yeah, I think this is a great example of native advertising. Many of you might be familiar with it. We did some really interesting research with Yahoo a few years back when it was first coming into vogue. And really one of our findings was that we should, you know, marketers and advertisers have the opportunity to actually think of all of their advertising and marketing as native, or trying to make it as native as possible. Simply what it means is making it as contextualized as possible, so that it really is understanding what else is going on in that environment that they can be a part of, so that it's not that interruptive, intrusive, stop everything else that you're doing and pay attention to me. It actually becomes additive to the experience. So the platform is enhanced by it. And in this particular case with Target on Pinterest, you have people who are sort of looking for a particular experience. They're searching on a particular topic, and Target is delivering to them essentially an advertisement saying, you're looking for these sorts of things, here's a product that we have, and you can easily act on it, you can buy it, you can move to that particular site really, really quickly and easily. So it basically is more respectful of people, of consumers, and it provides you know, more value. It generates value for the brand, for the platform, as well as for the audience.
And this next example, you know, we're talking about the future of advertising, but there's a very traditional channel here, which is email. And I know for marketers, from the press, you know, there's all this worry that, oh, email's over, people aren't going to read email and use email anymore. But email is really just a channel. It's a way to get information to people. And why don't you talk us through how the Skim has used email in really great ways to connect with customers?
Yeah, if any of you are skimmers, please do tweet us, because for those of you who are, you know well what this is about, and it's essentially a platform, a media platform delivered via email, but they're expanding their platform significantly. You can see they tweet, they have Facebook, but really they know their audience incredibly well. They have the opportunity to kind of connect and bond with their audience and provide really great content, which is a summation of what's been going on in the world, in the news, so that you can easily skim it, hence their name. But they also do some really great collaborations with their advertisers. And in this case, it's Chase. But you know, because of the way that they curate this, the products and services that they're going to deliver to you as a Skim reader are the ones that you want to look at. And they're going to be delivered in such a way that it's additive to what you're doing. So it's relevant to what you're doing. It's respectful the way that their tone and manner is. It's actionable, that you can click on it and purchase and sign up immediately. It provides value to the readers of Skim. Often they are specific discounts and special opportunities that you have that not everybody has. It's an exceptional experience. And it's highly shareable. Skim does a fantastic job of rewarding people who let others know about this Skim newsletter. And so it's really, I think, an overall great case study. If you haven't seen it, take a look at it. For marketers, is almost a checklist for how they really bond with their audience and treat them like peers rather than just consumers.
Great, and let's look at this next force of change, all these cultural, social, and geopolitical changes around us. So this next example is a marketer you and I both know well, Dan Briscoe from HCSS, a VP of marketing there. He was the Best in Show winner at Marketing Sherpa Summit, and I know you also interviewed him on your Sirius radio show. So what was Dan doing that you liked so much?
Yeah, thank you so much for introducing him to us and HCSS. I think for those who are at the conference, you know that his example, I think, is one of the most powerful because it's not a huge brand. It's a brand that focuses on the construction industry. It's software that's kind of the intel inside. It's what makes construction companies and large entities like that work well. But when he came on board within a short period of time as CMO, he really understood that they needed to get out of the business of talking about their products all the time and turn it around to really talk about who their amazing customers, their amazing clients and audience was. And those are people who felt like the construction industry wasn't getting acknowledged. It was not being seen as something that guidance counselors in schools were suggesting people go into. And yet it is, they're responsible for some of the largest infrastructure building that exists. And for anybody who's watching the news, we know what a sorry state infrastructure is in this country. So all of us are aware of that. In addition, this is an organization that services this industry that's helping to reinvent, re-energize, and repair this infrastructure. So it really brought these customers and how they're doing it to the fore as really the true heroes. And I think the success story, their increase in annualized revenue since the launch of the campaign of 53.6% is really phenomenal, as Dan likes to say. And I think in much of what they talked about, they didn't even talk about the company. It's because people knew that they were the ones behind it that really started to create this groundswell of interest with their consumers, with their customers. And it's because they connected themselves with what was going on in the social geopolitical world, not to be sort of save the world, but just to be part of it in the most positive way possible.
Yeah, it's great. And something I really like about this example, so if anyone's tuned in and they're seeing some of the previous, consumer-oriented examples, they're very hip consumer brands. Maybe you're a B2B and you're tuned in and you're thinking, I can't do what these other brands are doing. This is a construction software company. So if a construction software company could pull this off, really any brand can. And what I really like too, to build on what you were saying, Catherine, what HCSS did here and what Dan's team did, is they didn't say, which is traditionally good marketing, say, what is my customer's problems? And then what are the benefits and solutions my product can offer? And okay, great, that's what I'll market. They went one step further and they said, what are my customers' problems and challenges? And how can we help them solve that, whether it has anything to do with our product offering or not? And in this case, the challenge that they had, and their customers had in terms of getting new employees into the construction field, HCSS, their product, their software, does not do anything to help companies do that. But by building this movement around their entire industry and helping their entire industry, it brought this relatively small construction software company. You see that huge increase in revenue. That's because they were able to get and open doors that they had never been able to before. But we also know that Dan and his team and HCSS are not the only company out there with these amazing customer-first marketing stories. So we'd love to hear yours. Go to marketingsherpa.com/inspire. Tell us about your story. You got a chance to speak at Marketing Sherpa 2018 at the Aria in Las Vegas, up there on the big stage, and a chance to win a Marketing Sherpa award. So go to marketingsherpa.com/inspire. Tell us how you're practicing customer-first marketing. And then, Catherine, let's look at this last challenge, these new business and revenue models. Dunkin' Donuts is not a company we tend to think of when we're thinking about new revenue models. They're selling donuts. So how does this apply?
The fun thing about this particular example is that they work with a company called Waze. And if for those of you out there, if you don't know Waze, W-A-Z-E, I highly encourage you to download the app. It's essentially a directional app that allows you to put in your destination, but it's powered by people. So it's a new business and revenue model that basically crowdsources the information. So if you see an accident, if you run into a detour, you enter that information in very simply, or your co-pilot, so that you're kind of real-time providing information, and then everybody is benefiting from how your journey is happening, taking place. So it has both passive data collection as well as your ability to say, yeah, I had these things happen to me. And Dunkin' Donuts collaborated with them so that it's right there on Waze as you're going along, and it's morning and you might get into a traffic jam. There's exactly where your closest D&D is, and you can very easily click on it and find your way there. So it's crowdsourcing. It's understanding that your mobile device is far more than your mobile device. It's what gets you to the coffee in the morning, but it's doing it through this notion that that Dunkin' Donuts is part of these new business and revenue models that help everybody win by sharing their data.
Yeah, what I love about this is, we were talking about and doing this back in the day before this technology. I remember the idea of the virtual TV ad during morning drive time, where you'd have the billboard that the customer would be driving through, and then you'd try to get the radio ad to play roughly when they were going by the billboard to give them that sense of, in this case, wanting a donut or something like this. But as you said, these new business and revenue models make this so much more impactful for the consumer. All right, so we've thrown a lot at you in this webinar, and hopefully this is very empowering. I just want to also walk out and Catherine, maybe give a call to action on what can they do now? What can they do moving forward to kind of dip a toe into some of these different ideas we talked about and to try and see what works?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things you can do to get started, but probably the most important that we recommend is that given the speed of change, given how quickly things are changing, and how many different opportunities there are to evolve the way that you're thinking and practicing advertising and marketing, that experimentation is going to be the most important first thing that you can do. If you at least can carve out a percentage of your budget, just call it 10% of your budget, there are huge benefits by doing this. First and foremost is that it allows you to identify the causal relationship between actions. So it's not just that you did this over here and that happened. You're actually by having a control group, by having understanding what the variables are and conducting it like a real experiment, you're really able to see cause and effect and therefore learn what's working and what doesn't. It actually forces you to take bolder and innovative actions because everybody knows that all experiments don't succeed. That's why they call them experiments. But if what you're doing is taking a step forward to do this kind of a learning, then people are far more likely. It's really changing the culture within an organization to make it be that much more innovative. It does force measurement and accountability. So instead of just by increasing a percentage point, you're saying, what if we went up a half a percentage point? What if we went down a half a percentage point in spending? And so you can really start to see where the measurements are, which levers are working, and which ones are working better than others. And then finally, since nobody else can see the way that you're conducting your experiments, you're able to really gain a leverage in terms of competitive advantage because you're controlling what the learning is and you're controlling where you're trying your new experiments in different markets. So we really think that this is probably the most important change that you can do. And we often find that when you go to whoever's approving budgets and say that we want to at least carve out this amount so that we're creating a learning organization so that we're better tomorrow, know more tomorrow than we know today, there's that much more support for it.
Yeah, let's just try something, right? Let's experiment. We don't have to go all in. Let's experiment. Let's try it out, right? That's the budget ask. Yeah, well, we here at Marketing Sherpa are always looking to co-create and collaborate with you, our audience. When you close out of this webinar, a survey is going to pop up. Please give your honest feedback, what you liked, what you didn't, what you'd like to see more or less of, and that will help shape our content and help us better serve you better. And also, as I mentioned, Catharine is the author of Beyond Advertising, Creating Value Through All Customer Touchpoints, a book from Wiley. Highly recommend it. It's not the traditional book where you read and someone just on high in a business or marketing book tells you, here, do X, Y, and Z just because they're so smart. Catharine has so many quotes from across the industry of all these different viewpoints of how we're going to create the future of advertising. You saw some of them in the beginning of the presentation, and that's something I love personally. Catharine, thank you so much again for joining us and sharing your research with us.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
And thank you for watching. You can see more case studies and research at marketingsherpa.com.